Hi again, everyone, and welcome back to another very special edition of Once Upon a Turnbuckle. And I'm thrilled to be talking to someone who isn't massively unfamiliar to me since I've been on his show and had a blast. So it was only right that I invited him over here to do my little show. So all the way from over there, San Francisco, you're way over there, kind of thing. Yeah, I bring to you Buddy Sotello Esquire. Welcome to the show,
You
sir.
remembered that. Yes, master of
Can't
the
forget.
contract. I'm really thrilled to be, I've never set foot in your wonderful island, but I've always wanted to be in England. It's one of the bucket list things we talk about in America. I guess you have it in England too, the concept of a bucket list where,
Absolutely.
there's stuff you want to go do and places you want to go see. And England is the very England and Australia, but I can get to
Yeah,
England a lot easier than get to
you
Australia.
can. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's a long flight here from from us, and
Yes,
I thought
I
maybe
just
it's
I m- my background with England
mm,
goes to when I was a kid. I was in fourth grade. Okay, it's like about 8 years old.
mm-hmm,
Okay, when a child by the name of Chris Allen came as a new visitor to school. He had moved from England to the
mm,
United States. Okay,
mm,
and I was appointed as the kid to show him around.
okay.
All right. So while I was showing him around, all right, he tells me he watched the movie King Kong
All right.
the night before. And I said, wait a minute. I'm such a huge fan of science fiction and monster movies and all that at the
Mm.
time. He said, if King Kong had been on TV, why wouldn't I have seen it? He said, oh no, it wasn't on TV. I have this device. This is like 1974. Okay.
Right.
Said, I have a device. My dad has a device that allows you to see movies without a
Wow.
film screen on television. I said,
Wow.
I said, I bet him my lunch. I said, let me come over to your house and see this thing. I thought he was like a film projector, I figured.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was one of the very, very first VCRs.
Wow.
His dad turns out to be the head vice president of Dolby Labs. Now he is like the head of Dolby Laboratories. And
Wow.
he is the man that invented Sensurround that you see in every movie theater
Yeah, yeah,
everywhere.
yeah. Yeah.
So he like gave a like living at his house. He was like part of like the whole like Lucasfilm, George
Yeah.
Lucas science
Yeah, yeah.
fiction, Star Wars, all of that stuff went through him because he did the sound for all of it. And me and my friend Chris Allen, who is so British, and
Right.
he introduced me to everything from the Ruddles to Monty Python to the
Wow.
World's Worst Wireless Show to Benny Hill to Dave Allen to just about anything that you could consider British, at
Mm.
that time. He was still such a loyal Brit, and we wound up being one of the first 100 people to see the original Star Wars. Now you'd say, what, we got in line early? No, we were invited to see the sound editing done
What?
at Dolby Laboratories while Star Wars was still in like 7 different reels.
Okay.
And that's where they decided to cut out a bunch of stuff that eventually didn't come back until they did the like
Wow.
lost edition. They had the edition that had all the
Yeah.
other stuff
You,
on it. But I was one of the first 100 people to see it because Chris invited, was like by his dad, was allowed to invite like 5 or 6 friends over to
mm.
watch. And they wanted to see how kids thought about Star Wars and
Wow.
what we thought about the finished picture. And we were like, oh my God. But then going to school the next day and trying to explain it to anyone who hadn't seen any ads for it, everyone thought I was just absolutely insane. So it's like you'll have to see in the sun when it comes out. And
I,
he had all these pictures of what I thought were these metal bugs flying
right.
around this giant like metallic cantaloupe and
Mm.
this guy with this beaming sword standing there. And it's like, oh my God, that was the original artwork for the Death Star and the X-wings and the original poster
Yeah.
that he had it in his house. It was like on a wall there. Yoan Allen had it on the wall there. So not that this has anything to do with wrestling.
No, but this is what. Firstly, I think we take it for granted that Star Wars, yeah, it's always been around for me. It was obviously it did precede me, for a few years, but for someone who's not only lived it back then, before it was known, before there was the big hype around it, and you can put your name on that. That is one avenue I didn't think we were going to go down, and we've
Oh
done this
gosh,
lot
I
of
got I
debates.
got 100,000 stories. In fact, um, are you a fan of the show BattleBots?
I'm not.
The
No, well,
robotic
not that I'm not a
gun.
fan. I don't know about it really.
You had your British version, which is Robot Wars.
Oh, okay, yeah. I used to like that when it was on. Yeah, yeah.
The Robot Wars started in the United States,
Right.
okay, and then it broke off, and one half of it went to England, known as Robot Wars, and
Hmm.
then the other half stayed in the United States, called BattleBots.
Okay.
My friends were the ones that invented that show, the BattleBot show, and they still run it. And
Oh,
I
does
was
it?
a judge on BattleBots and on TV for 3 years, for
No
three
way.
seasons. The very beginning part of the of BattleBots, because I was there from like when everything just got immediately started with that for that. So that what that weaves into is that I've always like loved like combat, and I've loved like staged combat, and
Okay.
I love combat in all of its forms. I mean, I will watch MMA, and I will watch kickboxing, and I will
Mm,
watch Olympic judo. I will watch karate. I will
mm.
watch just about anything that involves, human hand to hand.
Yeah.
I've watched the Armored MMA. I don't know if you've seen that
I haven't
on
seen the
YouTube.
helmet. No, I haven't. No.
They get themselves all, dolled up in armor,
Wow.
and they have blunt, weapons, and they go and they beat the hell out of each other
That's
in an
brutal.
MMA ring.
Isn't it amazing? We've gone all the way back to like medieval times. For
Doesn't bother me. I think
no.
that in fact that's the thing about, wrestling,
Mm,
okay? Wrestling is the most fundamental human sport activity.
yeah.
Probably that and like racing, running,
Yeah.
trying to beat somebody by running faster than them.
Yeah.
But like probably
Competition.
the second thing that humans did to sort of compete against each other was beat each other up,
Yeah.
because that's just how humans are, right? I mean, so I think there's something fundamental in wrestling that is part of who we are as humans. And to one of the great things about humans is the ability to stage stuff,
Yeah.
the ability to, I mean, and to do that for our entertainment. Otherwise, any action movie you've ever seen,
Mm.
people who say wrestling, oh, it's so fake, it's so funny. It's like,
But
but Bruce Lee
they'll pay
never,
10, 15 quid to go and watch a film for 90
yeah,
minutes.
Bruce Lee never punched anybody in the
Yeah.
face. I
Uh,
mean, may have, like, by
but not
accident.
intention, not for the
Yeah, I
purpose of
mean,
that film.
Clint Eastwood never shot anybody
No,
in real life. John
no.
Wayne never shot, anybody in real
No.
life. So but the suspension of
Mm,
disbelief
mm,
is what is core to me in
mm.
what made my managerial career work. Okay.
Yeah.
And for people to, that's why it was important for me to create the character of Buddy Sotello
Okay.
Esquire,
Where
is
was
that,
that then? Where'd that come from?
yeah, I was able to pour, first of all, I really am a lawyer in real life, or barrister for
Okay.
you
Cool.
Brits.
Yeah.
I went to law school at McGeorge in Sacramento,
Mm.
I've worked with, I right now do a lot of technology law consulting. I work with
Okay.
law offices and attorneys in their, technology
Mm.
needs, and helping them with, their offices and
Okay.
dealing with computers and the cloud and all that other stuff.
Yeah. Keeping them
But
online.
but having to work with so many attorneys, it isn't. I have done other attorney litigation based stuff.
Yeah.
I know a lot of jerky attorneys too, not the ones I work for, but the other side.
Yeah.
And so Buddy Sotello is the embodiment of all the things about attorneys I can't stand
Yeah.
rolled into a character, and he is made for people to hate, you know, just like Bobby Heenan and his
I was
weasel,
going to say, is that
persona.
this is a bit of a lost art from what I can see of wrestling these days. There is a real absence of that type of manager or managers per se. I know Paul Heyman is trying to keep it alive, but
It's fun though. It's
yeah,
fun. The one thing I cannot do is the kind of bumping that I did as a young man. I mean,
okay,
that I've had actually, ironically, even though it had nothing to do with wrestling, I fell and I broke my hip in 2016 and had that all surgically replaced. And then last year, just a little over a year at this time, I fell and I broke my right shoulder and I had to have that totally replaced. So
oh, geez.
it's funny because I did all that wrestling for all the, managerial for all those years. And
Yeah,
I took some serious bumps in that.
yeah.
And then I also before I ever got into wrestling, I studied Okinawan Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay,
And
wow.
so I was studying to get a brown belt, which
Yeah,
is one
one
belt
below the
below
black.
black.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't do it. I was coming home, just beaten up, and my
Yeah.
girlfriend, is now my wife, she's just like, did somebody like mug you on the way back
You
home? I
do
was
this
like,
for
no, that's
fun.
just another day at class. She's like, I can't see you getting beaten up like every single night like this.
No, no.
You need to cool it out. But what I done, I learned how to. Okinawan Jiu-Jitsu is different than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I don't know how familiar you are with
No,
the.
so I did a bit of karate for a couple of years. So and I've seen a bit of BJJ, but
But
I've
it's
never
not
done it.
BJJ. It's not. It's the Japanese version, which
Hmm.
is really more like judo
Okay.
combined with the submission stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, judo doesn't have a lot of submission
Hmm.
arts. It really is just a lot of throwing.
Okay.
Okinawan Jiu-Jitsu involves the everything but striking, pretty much. We didn't learn strike stuff till like I was in it for like 3 years or whatever.
Okay.
You never even worry about that. You worry about getting a guy off his feet
Hmm.
and then putting him in some kind of lock or hold or
Okay.
something to, disable
Yeah.
him. And that's the Okinawan Jiu-Jitsu is what, Hoist Gracie made into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But he
Okay.
started with Okinawan first. There was really no Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a thing until
Hmm.
Hoist, kind of created it from morphing it
Okay.
from Okinawan into that. But I was like Okinawan, and it involved a lot of throwing and a lot of falling,
Hmm.
which then led me into what I could do in wrestling for All Pro Wrestling, which
Okay.
there over there.
There you go.
So but my wrestling stuff comes from like a core of the early 70s
I was going to
stuff.
say, where did it start? Your whole, when did you discover wrestling and what drew it to you? I mean, it's such a golden age by the sounds of it that you were brought up with.
Well, San Francisco in the 70s was mostly an AWA, American Wrestling
Yeah.
Association territory, but sometimes we would get the WWF, at the time it was
Yeah.
WWF, but it was mostly AWA stuff. But they had a lot of regional talent in a show that was called Big Time Wrestling that they
Hmm.
showed on Saturdays. And that had like Pat Patterson. Pat Patterson was just a huge hero in the
Okay.
Bay Area. He was like him and Ray Stevens. Ray Stevens
Okay.
was like Hulk Hogan. No, Ray
Right.
Stevens was like Ric Flair, and Pat Patterson was like Hulk Hogan.
Okay.
and that for just our region, for
Wow.
where we were, everybody knew who he was. Everyone knew who High Chief Peter Maivia
Yeah.
was. Okay,
Yeah. Everyone
Rock's
does now as
father,
well.
your
Yeah.
grandfather, yeah,
Yeah.
and Rocky Soulman Johnson
Yeah.
was a big deal in the Bay Area, and Pepper Gomez was a huge deal here
Wow,
in the
that's a
Bay
name I haven't heard
Area.
for a while.
Woody
Yeah.
Farmer, we had, let's see, we would get people that would come in like Bruiser Brody would come in for the AWA
Yeah.
shows, and we would have Crusher Jerry Blackwell was in there,
Mm.
and She God Nonno Casey and Sergeant Slaughter, and oh, but a big thing, the thing that just when I saw them in person early, I knew
Mm.
what a huge sensation they would be. That was the Road Warriors. They
Oh
were part
wow.
of that
Yeah.
early scene in the AWA. And
Mm.
man, that was the kind of thing that like was the first time like people like stood up immediately as they would start rushing in. And
Right.
we would all stand up and no one would sit down until the match was over, which was usually in a minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, to have to wait long.
So it wasn't a long investment in time.
No.
And so I love that kind of like that style of combat, that kind of like it's wrestling has its style, and
Mm.
that's what I like. It's like, kind of a human video game. Look, I'm a huge video game fan. I'm a huge, horror monster fan. I'm a
Cool.
huge comic book fan,
Wow.
you
That's ticks
know.
all over the place for me. That's cool.
I'm sorry.
That's ticks all over the place for me. Horror and horror, wrestling, video games, and I wasn't much of a comic guy growing up, but I'm kind of appreciating them more now. And starting to get a little collection going. Nothing really
Well, I
much,
told
but
you on my show,
mm,
I am a huge fan of British comics. Huge.
yeah,
And it always gave me a little slice of British life to see
yeah,
what you, A, were doing through like comic stuff like, Captain Britain.
yeah,
And as I said, I read a lot of 2000 AD,
yeah,
I read a lot of Dan Dare,
yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with,
I know of them. I think 2000 AD. I remember seeing possibly when I was younger. They were still maybe on the shelf somewhere.
but
Dan Dare I know of. I never saw any in person.
I'm a crazy obsessed fan with Judge Dredd.
Oh yeah, okay.
Absolutely love Judge Dredd. Again, nobody can make fun of the United States like you Brits can. You see right through us and you call it right, and you got nothing to lose. So
True.
you can make fun of us, and we're easily made fun of.
Yeah.
I
But we
mean,
do
this
it to
is a
ourselves as well. I think it's just so easy.
yes,
So
yes, you guys are very good at
yeah,
self. We take ourselves a lot more seriously, I think,
yeah,
and we take England super seriously. As I told you on my show, we
yeah.
got you got a British accent. We buy anything you guys sell.
That's
That's
cool. I need to get over there
that's the
next time
way
I
it
see
is.
him.
But so from when I was watching wrestling as a kid, and by the way, my parents hated it. And
Okay.
my dad watched it as a kid, and he was like, he hated all that kind of stuff. He always wanted me and my brother to like grow up and like,
Right.
get over it. And it's like, you should be, reading, watching Shakespeare,
Mm.
and I Claudius, and nothing but
Important stuff.
PBS. And he thought it was so unrefined and so beneath us
Mm.
to like something so crass and so so base, and the but me and my brother just couldn't get enough of it. And so it was just kind of a secret thing. Like we would sneak downstairs, watch some of it. He would beat the hell out of me. I would beat the hell out of him. He's
Doesn't
a
it
year
make it
older than
better
I
though
am.
when you think you're the only ones or you're part of the elite? I loved that when I
Yeah,
was a kid. It was
yeah, it
when
was. It
then
was.
when I got to like 15, 16, I started to kind of find my way into other things, but there were more people around me all of a sudden that were wrestling fans. And I was like, this is mine.
Yeah.
It's always been my thing. Leave it alone. So it kind of
Well,
took the appeal out of it for me. I loved it being just this
oh
kind
no,
of
I never
entertainment.
did. Finding more people that liked it was has always been something that I
Okay.
love. It's I and I just had this uncanny ability to find wrestling on TV whenever I was like really searching for it. I'd find it
Okay.
whether it was like a guest appearance on a talk show
Yeah, yeah.
by a wrestler, or whether it was like Spanish wrestling,
Mm,
a
yeah.
distant Spanish station or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
I just from there, I in high school, I found some friends of mine who were really big wrestling fans, and
Mm,
we were in this class. I had this job on the weekend where I did nothing. I was holding a store open, and I'd like some days I had like two or three customers. So I
mm.
actually wrote a wrestling game,
Okay.
like a an action game,
Right.
like D&D, like you have with
Oh, wow.
dice and
Okay.
charts and stuff like that for wrestling. And it was a hit with all my friends. And so, I tried to self-publish it, it never went anywhere. But that
Ah,
was like another thing that really made me like love wrestling more. And then in college, I would watch wrestling all the time, and my roommates hated it and all that stuff, but I'd still watch it.
mm,
And during the lunchtime, there was this thing called the Hump Show at UC San Diego, where I went to college.
mm.
And I would come in at noon and I would give a wrestling report
Okay.
for it was just broadcast locally, just on the campus. But people would be walking by the window and like giving me Four Horsemen signs and stuff like that. When I would mention the Four Horsemen, or I'd mention, their
Oh.
favorite wrestlers. So I continued with that as kind of like a thing that like had wrestling in my background.
Mm,
And then, as I said, I was studying jujitsu, and then I had this one job that didn't go my way, and I moved. Uh, I moved back to the Bay Area. I lived in Sacramento, but I moved to the Bay Area, and I saw a an ad for, well, it was like a news um segment
mm.
talking about this school called All Pro Wrestling
Okay.
in Hayward. And I contacted them and I said, I can't, I'd really like to be a manager. I was like, at this time, I was like, but at that time, bumping managers were really in the early
Okay.
2000s,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
2000.
yeah,
You had like Shane doing a lot
yeah.
of stuff, and you had,
You had more kind of yeah, even as many non-wrestlers doing stuff as you did the
and
actual.
Roland Alexander, the guy who runs APW, he likes corny old school gimmicks. And
Okay.
let's put it this way, I'm a decent, guy on the mic, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I did some legal stuff for All Pro Wrestling, like helped them out with their contracts
Okay.
and some disclaimers and things like that for the website and stuff like that. And so they assigned me to Mike Modest and Shane Dynasty to at the time. Now he's Shane Doc Atrocity. They schooled me in like how to become a manager, and they said I would be waiting for like a year before I could go in. I was like, fine, but I
Mm.
went every Saturday and took bumps from Vinny Massaro, and
Right.
he's maybe not an important name, but the lady who was in the valet, because they put management valets in the same class, because we were like
Okay. Yeah.
being taught as non-combatants, but
Yeah.
still needed to know how to take bumps and how to
Yeah.
do stupid little stuff like
Mm,
slaps and things like that. Well,
mm.
in that same valet class as myself was Sarah Del Rey, who is now the head of women's training at WWE.
Wow.
Yes, she used to beat the hell out of me because she didn't know what she was doing. So she would haul off and just clock me right in the ear, or like low blow me and miss and hit me right in the crotch. And all the guys would just laugh their heads off. And I would just be just, she stiffed
Wow.
me so many times. But God bless her, she's worked so hard to do what she's done. And she overcame a number of tremendous injuries to
Right.
become a trainer. And some of the people that I worked with have become big deals, and it's even from All Pro Wrestling,
Mm.
and then from All Pro Wrestling kind of had a big fallout, and they went and they moved to the guys from All Pro Wrestling moved to Pro Wrestling Iron, which is down on my lower side
Okay.
here underneath the APW, Pro
Oh yeah.
Wrestling Iron. And Pro Wrestling Iron was run by Mike Modest and Donovan Morgan, and I worked with Mark Smith, and Mark Smith was great. I mean, I converted him to a big, scary mass wrestler, a Super Destroyer 2000 All Pro Wrestling,
Right.
and so he was like my like big bodyguard dude.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was a wrestling dream come true to have that kind of pair up where I was the big mouth that would
Yeah.
like say all this stuff, and then when people get mad at me, I would make Mark back me up and
Which
like
makes a great character because we've seen some fantastic ones. They're all mouth but really cowardly. I mean, Shawn Michaels, if we're going to flip it a little bit, Shawn Michaels in, say, 93, 94, when he brought Diesel in, it just helped him because
yeah,
you,
my Shawn Michaels could fight on his own.
yeah,
It was much more of like, the Jimmy Hart situation,
yeah, yeah,
where you just wouldn't take me seriously, in the ring. And I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be. So, I wanted to always be nefarious. And I don't know if you followed the career at all of Andy Kaufman.
only when it crossed over. I know of him, obviously, when he kind of crossed over with Jerry Lawler and that. But
Do
apart from that,
yourself a
no.
favor. I'm going to give you a couple homework assignments.
Oh, nice, thank you.
One of the homework assignments is to go on YouTube and see Andy Kaufman's I'm from Hollywood.
Okay,
Okay. It's on, you can see it in several segments and Andy Kaufman is a guy I absolutely loved.
okay,
He was somebody as a wrestling manager, I think he was the pinnacle of
mm,
what wrestling managers need to be to generate heat and to
okay,
find ways to make people get really upset. Nobody was better than him. Now I know
okay,
Bobby Heenan was amazing on the microphone, and I
yeah,
know Jim Cornette managed all sorts of people. Same with Jimmy Hart. Those were all legendary folks.
mm,
But to be so annoying and to be able to understand the psychology of
mm,
how to make people upset.
mm,
Andy Kaufman was the guy
okay,
that I just loved so much. And if you see his I'm from Hollywood, he's in that like super annoying character the whole time and he's
mm,
loving it. And it's such an inside joke to him. That's what's
yeah,
so great. I don't understand why people love or want kayfabe so badly. Because the part that's
yeah,
really great about wrestling was, the ability to create a character
mm,
and to pour the things that you either love or you hate into that character and
mm,
making the crowd believe in that. That
yeah,
to me is what every actor strives to do, whether you're in
mm,
community theater or whether you're in a $200 million motion picture,
mm,
is you want people to believe that you're, Anakin Skywalker. You want people to
yeah,
believe you're Abraham Lincoln. You want people to believe, you're Buddy Sotello.
mm,
You want people to believe that. When you're just yourself, Russell Jackman, when you're just yourself, that's harder to do
yeah.
because then if people don't like it, it's a personal rejection of yourself.
That's very true. Yeah, I never thought of that actually.
And it
As
can be
much
that
as,
very hurtful. If people were booing
yeah,
me personally in the ring, I would be very hurt by it. When they boo
yeah,
Buddy Sotelo, I love it.
that's a job done, didn't it? Really, that's a job well done. You should be very, very
Yeah,
happy
well,
with that.
and you're getting people to believe what you
Mhm.
want them to believe.
Do you know one guy that I just sprung to mind actually? Who I never gave credit to when I was growing up. He was, and he did the job right. He was really annoying. I hated him in the ring. I hated everything he did. I hated listening to him. Was Jerry Lawler. But
Oh yeah.
if you consider how massive a hero he was in Memphis at the same time that he was one of the most hated guys everywhere else for the WWF. It's almost like, how do you do
and the
both?
AWA, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
how do you
he
do both
was.
without really changing who you are?
I mean, Roddy Piper is
Yeah,
another good example of
yeah,
that, of a guy who just, because of his raw charisma, people
mm,
just liked him. They just liked
mm,
seeing him come in there. I mean, also to a large extent, if you go back even further, to Captain Lou Albano, you
yeah,
know, he was a guy that had his fans, even though he was quote unquote a bad guy.
mm,
And I mean, Buddy Sotello has people that love him too
yeah,
because of the same sort of thing. He brings color and brings, you
yeah,
know, when you have a relationship with your talent,
mm,
who you have in the ring, and it's a good one, you
mm,
can play off of each other
yeah,
and get you can find ways. A bad manager is one that is just constantly barking all the time
yeah,
and trying to get heat constantly
mm,
and not paying any attention to what the wrestler's doing in the ring, but they're just interacting with the crowd the whole time
mm.
and they're trying to make the heat about them. That doesn't work as a manager. You
Does
have
anyone
to know.
does anyone spring to mind?
I'm sorry.
Does anyone spring to mind to you?
Let me
In kind
see.
of
I mean, mostly they're in the indie level,
okay.
and they don't go very far because they really try so much to get
Hey,
attention.
is that like yeah? Is that a lack of experience kind of thing, or a lack of kind of natural talent in that role? They just
Yeah, and it's also a lack of working with like the talent that you
yeah,
have and not being there for when the match is being gone over
yeah,
ahead of time so that you know where your spots are.
yeah,
And if you are someone that takes it seriously, and I do,
mm,
having managed so many matches, you want to know the spots that are the high spots, and
mm,
you want to know when they're dead spots, when guys are going to be working holds and moves,
yeah,
because that's where you can do something.
yeah,
When a guy is in, a headlock or a leg scissors or something like that,
mm,
that's when you can work the crowd. If when your guy is trying to come back or your guy is trying to cheat, and
yeah,
you're going to be there and involved on that. That's something it's important to know because you need to know sometimes what's coming up two or three big moves in
yeah.
advance because there are times like I've seen guys decide to take it home early. And
Okay,
so suddenly it's your spot, although you were expecting like 10 other things to happen
yeah,
before that happened. And
yeah,
so if you're not there at the right spot at the right time,
mm,
it can be, well, it's, in a good best case scenario, they'll just yell at you in the locker room and they'll say, "Why the hell weren't you ready for
yeah,
that spot, you idiot? That
yeah,
we told you to be there." But if you're supposed to catch someone or something like
yeah,
that, on a dive out and you're not there,
mm,
that gets a lot worse,
yeah,
because guys can get hurt doing that. And I'll just say this, that like, when you're at ringside, and you've never like managed or been part of an actual show, have you? I'm
I have
not.
not. No,
No.
no.
So there's so many things about being ringside that are surprising. They're surprisingly fast
Mm,
and they're surprisingly dangerous. Okay.
yeah,
People don't really understand that. Like, let me give an example. Okay. When I was in manager's training class, we had this valet. The
mm,
valet was cute, but she was short. She was like
okay.
4'8", which I'm trying to give you a metric thing. It was like
I go on
one,
feet and that's fine. Yeah.
okay, it's like one, like 1.75 meters or something like that. She was
Okay.
not very tall. She was
No.
and so the we were doing bouncing off the ropes, just learning how to bounce back and forth on the ropes,
Mm.
which by the way isn't as easy as you think.
No, I'm sure it's not. No.
It takes a lot more timing than you think.
Mm.
And the ropes don't just bounce you off like giant rubber bands. It's like you have to do a lot of effort yourself.
Yeah.
But this girl, her head, now the ropes are not, they're not like these fun, like rubbery kind of things. People think they are because of the way they look on, but what they really are is a steel cable and
Yeah.
rope wrapped around it, and then like plastic covering put over the rope that's kind of like a garden hose.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And so this girl, normally what you're supposed to do is when you bounce over the ropes, you take your shoulder and but you'll see guys, put their shoulder back and
Yeah.
grab, kind of bend over the back of the ropes. Your shoulder
Yeah.
clears the ropes, bounces back, and then bounces you back in. Well, she was so short that the rope went right and hit her right in the back of the head,
Right.
just like right where you would rabbit punch somebody.
Okay.
And she bounced off the ropes and fell flat on her face. And her
Oh,
nose was all bloody and quit the next day.
okay.
So I mean, it's the floor is littered with people who wanted to be wrestlers or wanted to be managers,
Yeah.
but in going through the rigors of it,
Mm.
it's not as easy as you think. And so getting trained, even as just a valet or as a manager, I had to
Mm.
take some pretty serious bumps. And once I was a manager, I took some serious bumps. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure people want to do that anymore, especially if you're in a managerial position.
It's, it's
And
quite a short window that was happening if you think about the history of wrestling.
yes,
Because when I was growing up, you didn't see managers like Jimmy Hart and that really get
yes,
physically involved. They may have got thrown out of the ring onto someone,
right.
but they were never doing what they were doing in the height of when Attitude Era and sort of beyond that. Um,
No, you're right. You're right. And a lot of people would say, well, you were crazy to do it.
yeah,
And I was, but it was something I wanted to do so badly. And I got to work with some really great folks. I mean, from Pro Wrestling Iron, I was able to manage Nigel McGuinness for a show.
wow, there we go.
And
Okay,
that is a big deal to me.
right,
I look back and it was against Bison Smith. And it was a great match where I got body slammed right at the end. And Mark got to do his claw on me, which I'd wanted him to do for so long because I love the claw and
okay,
I love selling for that. That was just
that's
fantastic.
cool.
That was just fantastic. Then,
That is old
well,
school.
but then All Pro Wrestling went, I mean, Pro Wrestling Iron went out of business.
Mm.
And so for a couple of years, I wasn't doing anything. And then I was approached by California Championship Wrestling by some guys in the Central Valley. And that's a long drive. It's like a 3.5 hour drive to get
Okay.
to where CCW was going. But those were the best shows. That was the greatest time of my life
Wow.
was
Okay.
working for CCW because I was like the big deal there. I was like the big deal manager where
Okay.
I was like a real force of like what was going on in the Fed and my guys had the titles and or they were competing for the titles. I worked with the Reno Scum. I don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar with them.
No, I'm not, but they sound great.
They were in TNA for a
Oh,
little.
okay. All right.
They fought in TNA for a little while.
Oh, okay.
And we had Timothy Thatcher was a big deal. And Timothy
Yeah.
Thatcher's gimmick was the British Messiah. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't. No, I used to have a Timothy Thatcher t-shirt because I had like what we have over here, Wrestle Crate, one of these like monthly kind of subscription box things. I had it for a few months, and it was a Timothy Thatcher t-shirt in there, and I didn't
He,
actually know
he
who he
he
was.
pretended he was from England. That was his
Okay.
gimmick. So yet
Ah.
another tie-in for me and the lovely Brits out there. And
Ah.
Timothy couldn't be a nicer guy. I'm so glad about his success.
Mm.
And Brian Cage stopped
Okay.
by
Yeah.
CCW. We had him wrestle for us a couple times, and so it was a great thing, but it didn't continue on. And so but from there, I also started working with wrestling for charity, and I'm actually doing a show in 2 days. I'm going
Oh,
to be
cool.
back managing again,
Awesome.
But no bumps, man.
I was going to say, firstly, I was going to ask you still doing it, knowing that actually, yeah, maybe you're not taking quite the bumps
No,
you
I'm not. No,
like.
I'm a total. I'm just gonna be there to buy. You can do a lot with ring psychology without
Yeah.
having to bump. I mean,
Yeah.
you can annoy the crowd. But it's also important when I watch a match to really watch a match.
Yeah.
I'm actually in there giving advice to my wrestlers, like
Mm.
stay on him and work the arm, work the leg. You
See,
know,
you're not just there for the crowd, and I think that's the important thing. Is the believable managers are there? They are there with their charges, their
Right.
wrestlers,
I
and
will, the
they're
guy
focused
will
on
roll
them.
out the ring and I'll, pat him on the
Yeah.
back and say, encourage him and say no. And of course, one of my favorite things to do, and I always love to do, is hassle the ref. Oh, I love that. That's one of my favorite things to do in the entire universe is
True.
to just give the refs a hard time. I will just say, where did you, wherever the location is, like if it's, let's say it's Antioch or something like that. I'll say,
Mm.
where did you learn how to count? Antioch High? Is that Antioch High School? Is that where, I love like these like old school insults that I
Yeah.
can throw at people that
Mm.
are not dirty, they're not profane. I
No.
never swear. I never work blue.
Mm.
I don't use anything racial,
Okay.
or anything like that. I
Mm.
want people to be able to, if their kids were sitting in the front row, I would want, now, I might, yell at a kid that's sitting in the front row and say,
Yeah. Yeah.
if this wrestler loses, it's your fault. Young
But
man
you
or
got
young
to kind
lady.
of work there a little bit. That's fair.
Right.
But
And
going
I'll
absolutely.
say this, you just never want to, if you don't want to get hassled, don't sit in the front row of a wrestling match or a stand-up comedy
I
thing.
know stand-up comedy. I would
Right.
find it
If you
boring.
sit in the
Yeah.
back,
Yeah.
if you don't want anyone to mess with you, sit in the back.
Yeah.
We won't come out that far out that's like, if you're right there on the front row,
Exactly. But
it's
you're in their eye
perfect. Like,
line. Yeah.
I'll make fun. I'll say like, I thought I saw you on the internet at www.imamoron.com. You
Oh,
know,
that's great.
it's these little cheap
Yeah.
Mad Magazine type insults that like, Don Rickles like insults that you throw at people that are, not, they're insulting, but not something offensive,
But they can give back on that. And if they're not going to
Oh
give straight
yeah,
back to you, they're going to give back in,
right.
obviously.
But what you want to do there is you want to get them really angry at you, and then you move to another part of the arena. And so they're just barking at
Riled
you.
up.
And they usually, what that does is that creates like what I call Buddy Sotello's pockets of hate in the
Okay.
crowd. There's like these pockets of people that will just hate you, and that's where you go to get heat when your guy is outside the ring, when your guy is in a hold of some type,
Yeah.
or both guys collide in the middle of the ring and they're both lying down, and then I will go to the pockets of hate and say, you should be rooting for my guy, not your guy, my guy, because my guy is going to be the champion. And the fans will get even angrier and say, we're not going to root for anybody that you're, and just when they think they're getting to you, you walk away. And then they get
That's
even
great.
angrier, and you just build that hate up, which is great because that sort of release is what people are paying money to
Yeah.
go see. Okay. They
Mm.
don't want to see you make a big deal about yourself, but they want to be interacted with
Mm.
to make them give them something to hate because there's usually someone in their life they would like to scream at as
Yeah.
much as they're screaming at you, but
Mm.
they can't scream at them. So they pay money and they go scream at you. And that's great, especially when it's a character you've created to be
Mm.
screamed at. Buddy Sotello is a construction it's like a tackling dummy. It's like one of those karate dummies that
Yeah. Yeah.
you whack, those
Mm.
mannequins.
Yeah.
It's made for that. Buddy
Mm.
Stellar is made for that. And it's so much fun to see other people having fun,
Mm.
hating the same thing that I hate.
Would you have as much fun if you don't see a lot of face managers around at
Terrible.
all?
I've had to be a face manager a couple of times.
Okay.
Awful,
Okay.
terrible,
What can you
couldn't
do?
stand
You know,
it.
what
It
can,
was just the worst.
yeah,
All you can do is root for your guy. And if you're not a
yeah,
cute lady, guys are not going to be all that interested in
no,
you just wandering around. You're just there as just literally just doing nothing. And no, it's being a heel is all I'm really good at. Being
mm,
Buddy Sotello is all I'm really good at. I mean, once my dad's girlfriend who didn't understand me either, was just like, "Oh, well, if you're so good at acting, why don't you do Shakespeare in the Park?" I'm like, "No, I can't do Shakespeare. I'm not doing Shakespeare." Buddy Stello requires no lines. I don't read from a script.
no,
I don't read from, there's nothing that is prepared for
mm,
what, I mean, I think of like what my promo is going to be, like if
yeah,
I'm going to be doing a mic promo, but when I'm actually out there managing,
mm,
none of it is scripted for me.
no,
It's all just stuff that I think of on
organic,
the fly, and sometimes the audience will give you things to work with.
yeah,
If a guy is really goofy looking, you can make fun of how goofy he looks, and that kind of thing. Or you can make fun of what they're wearing, or say like, oh, like I didn't know that Walmart had a hairstyling department too. You know, you just you go like are you sure you went to the men's department because I'm not quite sure with that haircut. That kind of thing. It's but it's light stuff, and
yeah,
it's stuff that you just go and try to use off the cuff. You don't try to, and then I don't. If somebody's really acting really upset or they're drunk or something like that, then I just won't. That we
no, fair
had
enough.
one time with Mark Smith and myself, there were these guys who used to come dressed as the Insane Clown Posse,
Okay, yeah, yeah,
and those guys got under Mark Smith's skin. And Mark,
right.
the Bison, he was gigantic. I don't know if you've seen a lot of
I
him,
haven't.
but he was
Maybe I'll
like
have a look.
6'4" and almost 300 pounds, and he was like cut like a rock. And
Right,
I did have to like hold him back and say, "No, we're not. I don't want to have to call it. I don't want
no,
to have the cops called on us." He was ready
no,
to like tear him apart. So there
gonna
are
cross the
fans that
line.
can take it too far. And the one time
Yeah,
in Pacifica, me and Vinny Massaro were so unpopular. It's the only time I've had people throw stuff at me, which wasn't pleasant. They threw cups of ice at
okay,
us.
that's gonna hurt.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God,
Yeah,
get me out of here. I didn't want, yeah,
yeah,
I was a little bit, sometimes and then another mini story is that
mm,
we were in, I think, Antioch, and there was a fan in the front who wasn't quite right. He was,
mm,
specially, he was there, as a kind of like, someone who he was on the spectrum, as we would say,
yeah,
and he dumped an entire thermos of hot coffee on Vinny as he walked to the ring.
right, okay,
And it was a really hot, it was boiling hot coffee. So
yeah,
Vinny was like really mad at this guy and wanted to kill him. And yet when we were done with the matches and we were done with the show, who was out there waiting for an autograph from me and Vinny?
him,
It was him.
yes,
But the person who took him to the show explained, he's kind of on
yeah,
the spectrum, and he loves wrestling so much, and he's sorry he did it, but he
just
just got so excited when, he was in front of
too
him, and he
into it.
hated Vinny so much that, he just threw the coffee right
Literal,
on him. So,
literal heat. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
there is,
When you're a bad guy, sometimes people, and you're that believable,
yeah,
sometimes people do have trouble, telling the difference between what's in the ring
yeah,
and what's real life, and especially people that like spend too much time drinking before the show and
true. I've,
stuff like that. That can get a little bit
I've
hazardous.
got to admit, as I've gotten older, I really have appreciated, and I've said this many times on my shows, I think, is I've really appreciated the heel and the art of everything that the heel does. When I was growing up, obviously you hated them, which looking back on it now, they did their job, and there were some of them that really did stick with me. Um, in terms of, embracing the heel characters and that, I mean, you mentioned some names along the way that kind of maybe inspired
Sure.
you.
I mean, Jimmy Hart, who I've met, Bobby Heenan, I also met.
Wow. Okay.
I love Captain Lou Albano. I
Mm.
love Freddie Blassie when he was a manager. He was
Okay. Yeah.
really, really outrageous. Luscious Jimmy Valiant was
Yeah.
great. And that's the thing is what's great as a manager for me is to find things that I love from Jim Cornette and
Yeah.
things that Paul Heyman would do, and just to take little snippets of that
Yeah.
and then say, oh, that's something I'd like to bring to my
Yeah.
managerial character. And I'd like to, pay a little bit of homage to each one of my favorite,
Yeah. But
managers
make it your
by doing
own.
what I do in the ring. And,
Yeah.
and, that like the one thing is like a lot of people also don't remember the Grand Wizard that much.
No, see, he was quite a bit before my time in terms of when I was
He
watching
was
it
he
and
was the
bounced.
first manager that really influenced me as a kid. And you want to know why?
Go on then.
It's because he was the first manager to not be an ex-pro wrestler or an athlete in any way, shape, or form. He was
Good point.
spindly, he was
Yeah.
small, and he never got physically involved
No.
in wrestling at all. He
No.
would just be the mouthpiece, but he was a wonderful mouthpiece for
It's
so
great.
many wrestlers.
He's a great image as well. I think the look of him, from the little that I did get to see of him when I look back on it,
But he
I mean,
was
he
the
was a hit
epitome of the
machine.
little ratty guy that
Yeah.
had big guys around him that would do all the enforcing for him, and
Yeah.
he would never take him physically seriously, and he never got involved. He didn't even
No.
trip guys. He didn't even like like hit guys with chairs or anything like that.
No.
Now I will say I actually did get in the ring a couple of times,
Okay.
and both of them were terrifying. I wound up getting, you can see one of them on YouTube where me and Super Destroyer take on Donovan Morgan and Robert Thompson. And Robert Thompson, who's 265 pounds, jumped off the top rope and gave me a splash.
Oh
And
wow. Okay.
that wasn't so easy. That one, was not like a fun
No.
moment. I crossed my arm over myself just as instinctive, and
Yeah.
he almost broke my arm because if he caught it while my arm was swinging over, then that would have been. And then one time I was picked up by a guy, hoisted me up in the air, and was going to throw me outside the ring, and my tag team guys were going to catch me, and
Mhm.
they missed,
Oh
and I
wow. Okay.
actually hit the floor. And fortunately, part of the gimmick was I came to the match all like combat out. I have the battling Buddy Sotello persona, which I wear all these knee pads and elbow pads
Okay.
and a helmet and all this other stuff. And
Nice.
fortunately, I had that helmet because I landed on the helmet
Oh wow.
and it actually broke the helmet, and it would have broken my
Jeez.
head if I landed on it. So that
Wow.
would have been something. And then I've taken avalanches and clotheslines and drop kicks off the top rope and power bombs and
Funny.
Michinoku drivers and of course the standard body slam and
Talking about a
suplexes
bucket
and
list at the top of the show. Did you have a bucket list of things that you wanted to moves you wanted to take or something? Or you
no,
just
I well sort of. I mean, it meant something to the boys, and it meant something to me to
Hmm.
be able to say I could take these things,
Yeah,
and that
true. Yeah.
I was younger, and I had always admired wrestling,
Mm.
and to when you're younger, you also think, oh well, it is all fake, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow, once you start doing it, you're like, no, this stuff has some real impact
Yeah. Yeah.
associated with it, and if you don't know what you're doing and you really, are not paying attention and you really don't know how to fall, you'll
Yeah.
get seriously, seriously hurt. Because I've
That's
seen that happen more times than you'd believe for something where everything is supposedly choreographed. I mean, the fact
mm,
is, when it's live, when it's live action,
yeah.
you're never quite sure 100% how everything is going to go.
No.
And so terrible. I saw this one guy just do a leapfrog, but when he landed from the leapfrog, completely tore his knee ligaments
Ah.
out. because
Yeah.
he just, you know, he hyperextended his
Yeah.
leg when he landed on it, you know, and
Yeah.
leapfrog, that's not a finishing move. That's
No,
not,
quite.
you know, it's sometimes it's simple stuff I've
Yeah.
seen guys get really hurt on, and
Yeah.
stuff that you'd think would kill them by going through burning tables
Yeah.
filled with
That's
broken glass and thumbtacks. They just get right up from. But
yeah.
here's another example of how tough these guys are. Vinny Massaro, who I did manage for a long time, he was just sitting around bored
Mm,
in the office at APW. And he
right.
says, look at this. I can show you what my pain tolerance is. He takes a stapler and he goes thump, thump, thump in his forearm, and he puts like 6 staples in his forearm. And I thought,
Right.
oh well, it's a gimmick. He's got like
Yeah.
staples bent and all that stuff. He's all, no, watch. He takes a screwdriver and then he plucks them all out from his forearm,
What?
and blood's coming out of his forearm.
Jeez.
He's
And
just
then you
like,
come and
I can do
look,
that. Yeah, he
why?
just do it because he was bored,
Yeah.
and he wanted to show everyone that his pain tolerance was at that level. So
Oh, there you
some of
go.
these guys, that, you know, that's something that they're into, the pain, and showing
Yeah.
guys afterwards like, oh, my chest is so bruised, you know,
Mm.
they will take pictures of it and put it
They're
on
proud of it.
social media, you know,
Yeah.
because it's showing, you know, that they're willing to suffer for their art.
Yeah.
And
And it
that being
shows
said, but
there is
that
a
being said, we
go
just
on.
had a guy who's a good friend of mine, Sir Samurai, was actually declared dead in the ring 2 weeks ago,
Jeez. Oh my God.
about a month ago. Fortunately, the paramedics brought him back to life,
Okay.
but
Wow.
he actually suffered a heart attack from wrestling in the ring. He's like my age, though. He's like in his 50s and he
Okay.
shouldn't be wrestling, but some people can't stay away from it.
No.
And I think he's going to change and start doing something less intense physically, but just, you know, that's the, you know, the sad part of it. The sad part is I know a lot of guys who've died, and
Yeah.
it wasn't all ring related. I mean,
Hmm.
Mark Smith wasn't a ring related accident. He just died because he had a congenital heart failure.
Okay.
Tony Jones last year died, unfortunately, because of a heart condition. Virgil Flynn, I've known, who's died. I knew Crash Holly before he
Wow.
died. I
Yeah.
knew Roland Alexander, who ran APW. He's dead. And Kirk White, who ran Big Time Wrestling, he's dead too. And Virgil Flynn
Yeah.
died. I mean, these are all like, a lot of them were friends of mine. Boom Boom
Wow.
Kamini, who I managed, he died. That's a lot of death
Yeah.
for, you know, you know, one set of interest for one let's put it this way. I don't know as many people that love video games have died, you
Well, no, I
know,
was going to
by
say
life.
for a form of entertainment. I mean, essentially, let's kind of look at it. That people
Yeah,
will
a
watch
lot,
it
but
for
I mean,
enjoying it.
you know, one person died because he was in a car accident. You know, it's
Yeah.
like there's just this weird star crossing that
Mm.
goes on when you're in wrestling.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky I'm still around, but you know, I never know. You never know when your numbers
No,
come up.
I mean we've got to remaining topical. I suppose a nod to Sabu. Sadly, we lost him, but
I met him
he
also. I met him also.
he was wrestling up until last month.
Look, the guy was a living car accident. I mean, the
Yeah,
guy couldn't
I am surprised, that he was still doing it.
he couldn't stop. He's just
No,
one of those guys like Terry Funk. Like the day that they stop wrestling is
is the
basically,
day they go.
it's like a
Absolutely.
shark in water. You've got to just keep moving.
Yeah,
A guy like Sabu just had to keep wrestling. And as soon as he stopped, that's it
yeah,
for him, you know?
yeah.
And I mean, it's weird to think that wrestling has so much of a pull on you.
Mm.
But when you perform and you get the applause of the crowd and you make the crowd believe what you want them to believe,
Yeah,
and that I think it's Terry Funk who said, I can't make you believe that wrestling is real, but I can make you believe that I'm real.
wow.
And that's the thing that makes me do what I do. Is that concept is that I don't care if wrestling is real or not. But what you see out there, even though it's a fake character,
Mm.
It is me though, and it
Yeah,
is the thing that I've created for you
yeah,
to hate. So
yeah.
go ahead and hate Buddy because he's there for you to hate. And you'll feel better that you yelled at Buddy than you yelled at your kids or your dog or your boss or what
Yeah.
have you. Okay? So that's why I'm here as Buddy Sotello. And I'll probably be Buddy Sotello till the day I die.
And you know what? This is an absolute ideal way to kind of bring this full circle and wrap this up. This is this has been amazing. Yes, when you're out in the ring, you can hate Buddy Sotello, but we have absolutely loved having you on this show. This has been an absolute blast. Something tells me there is another one, two, three of these that we could do by delving
I'm
into your
thrilled.
experience. So,
I couldn't have a better time. And the only thing is I didn't let you get any words in
hey,
edgewise.
this is the point of me having people on here is to find out about you, and that's exactly what we've
I thought
done.
we'd talk about the Ruddles. I thought we'd talk about Weetabix. I thought we would talk about
Tell you what,
you
we
know,
we'll do another one where we put wrestling to the side and we'll just talk
I
about
know. I mean, there's so much
people's.
about England that I questions to ask about England. Like,
There you
you
go.
know,
There you go.
Stonehenge. Have you been up to Stonehenge?
I did, yeah. And would you believe, actually? See, I grew up probably about 45 minutes away from where Stonehenge is. Now I moved
Wow.
down here to the southwest, and I never visited it until last year. I've always driven past it. There's a road that goes past it, which brings you down to
Wow.
my part of the country, and it's notorious for bad traffic at that bit because
I
everyone slows
imagine
down.
so. I
And
imagine
I've
so.
it's always been a real kind of bugbear of mine because I've always been driving that road. And I'm like, I know we're going to hit traffic. So we went there and we took the kids there, and it is one of those places you do need to visit. But
I do. I do.
yeah, it's it
So
is
don't
it
be
is
surprised if one of these
thrilling.
days I'm knocking on your door
Oh
saying,
no, do it. Yeah,
give me a ride
absolutely.
up to Stonehenge,
Hey,
pal.
we could do
Because I
that.
don't know. I
That'd
don't
be
know where I'm
great.
going.
We got there, and I think it was just a Sunday. It wasn't even like what I would class as a busy day. It was a weekend, and it was really busy. We were queuing up to go in, and the lady that let us in said, "Yeah, we've got 6,000 people booked in this morning." That just gives you an idea of how busy it
Wow.
is.
In
So
other words, you got to look at it pretty fast, and they're like
the
pushing you
good thing
right out of the
is,
way.
it's I didn't know the layout of it. You kind of where you go in is like the visitor center bit, and then they you get a shuttle bus to the actual stones, and it's that's why from the road it doesn't look very busy because it's so widespread, but you've got people being ferried to and from the area. So it
Wow.
does break you up. It is a place to go. So absolutely, if you're over here.
There's
So
so much of England I want to see. I want to see
well,
Piccadilly
if hey,
Circus, and I want to see
if
Tower of London, and I want to see, all sorts of, Leicester Square, and just everything. You got so much wonderful stuff there, and
well,
I will make it to England, and one of
do
these
it.
days I will call you up, and you'll say, "Oh my God, what did I get myself into?"
No,
Be
if you want a
stuck as
guide,
a
I
tourist
don't.
guide.
I've not been to a lot of these places. I moved away from. I grew up not again where I grew up from, not far from London. I'm not a city person, but I'll happily go back there to kind of
Wow,
if you
be
need a
my
guide.
tour
So
guide.
absolutely,
You're
there you go.
delightful, Chris. I'm of all the people that I've gotten to know through this, you're one of my favorite
Oh,
folks that
bless you.
I've gotten
Thank
to
you
know.
so much. And you, this has been, it was really, really easy. I love it when I go on someone else's show, mainly because, I don't have to think about it, and I can just go wherever it takes. But it was so easy, and this has been just as easy. So, hey,
Anytime,
before I
anytime
let
you run
you,
out of gas, anytime
hey,
you run
it's
out of gas,
never,
I'm here
never
for you.
gonna be that. Um, before I hit the stay on after I hit the stop button, I forgot to say that at the beginning because I'll say goodbye to you properly. But before I wind this down for the purpose of the recording, couple of minutes, let people, yeah, plug anything that you've got, your appearance that you've got coming up, your podcast,
Sure, yeah.
where can
Well,
people
I
find you?
don't think anyone from England's going to be able to make it in two
No,
days
probably not.
over
But there's hopefully
to my
someone from over
show.
your way there might be watching this.
But if you're interested in hearing about Marin Mania, you can go to givebutter.com/Marin Mania, and that can tell you about the show and that we're doing. But mostly, I want to plug my podcast, which is Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast, and you can find that on YouTube, but you can also find it on Facebook at facebook.com/ wrestling and everything coast to coast, all one word. And you'll actually see Chris's interview on there. And we don't talk about the same things because we don't talk about me. We talk about Chris. Although I do
Still,
mention Judge Dredd and
yeah, but
so
that's
forth.
cool. That's cool.
Yes. And it's really I love the fact that, I can stretch out. This is from one coast to a much further coast, but I love it. And it expands my world and gives me such a view of how everybody else lives. And I really appreciate that so much and having the opportunity to talk to your fans.
Anyway, no, that's been brilliant. Anyway, there will be another part. We will do this again because
Thank
we
you.
can go in all kinds of places. But
Thank
Buddy,
you.
thank you so much, and all the best, mate.
Thank you. Good night.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and hit the subscribe button. Also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Once Upon a Turnbuckle to keep updated about all future shows.